Hi, everyone, and welcome to Managing Mindsets, a training in leadership. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Deidre Harris, and down to the bottom left, you can kind of see I've been in the field for a long time. And I didn't put that in there to show my resume, but rather to show that leadership for me has come up in every single role I've ever been in. And even as a young child, I've always been interested in leadership at every single level. So I want to encourage you that as you think about your life, both personally and professionally, how has leadership shown up for you? So we are just coming out of COVID. For many of us, we're either going back into the school face to face or maybe still doing hybrid, but eventually we know that we'll be going back. And here's the thing. If you're joining us, go ahead and write into the chat box something that you're feeling right now. And if you're watching the replay, hopefully you've downloaded the journal that goes with this training. And I want you to answer the question on there. How are you feeling right now? How are you feeling just a day or so ago? How are you feeling a week ago, a month ago, several months ago? Write all of those things down because we know that the virus and all of the different changes have left many of us so fatigued, worn out, stretched thin, you name it. And as a lot of you are writing, even now you're feeling overwhelmed, tired, exhausted. Thank you for sharing that. As you can see on the screen, many other people have felt the same thing that you have. And I know that I certainly have felt that way. So in my work, over the last year or so, I've been doing a lot around leadership in many different ways. For example, I've been working with teams and programs around what does it look like to have highly effective teams and what do those characteristics mean? I've been working with a lot of teams and again with programs around mindset in terms of circle of control or feeling empowered or even disempowered. A lot of people are feeling like things are happening to them. So, how can we shift that for them? I've even been working with a lot of leadership groups in terms of wellness. For example, this is a great analogy up on the slide. How do we fill our well or our bucket, knowing that we get to pour into our staff and our teachers' bucket or their pitchers, knowing that they get to pour into families and children. And so when we use this analogy, we always spend a lot of time talking about pouring from our overflow and not from the cup, meaning we want to be so full that when we give to others, we have a lot to give instead of emptying our tank and feeling tired and exhausted, like some of you have already mentioned. I also have my cohort of directors where we're going through a 10-month program including coaching. And so helping our teachers or our directors step into their leadership and support their staff. So the question I have for you is, what do you think those all have in common? Mindset. And I touched on that just a few seconds ago. When we look at the definition from Merriam-Webster, it talks about a mental attitude or an inclination. And we know for many of us, we've heard about fixed mindset versus growth mindset. And this is where we get to spend our time today, actually talking about a leadership mindset. And what are those things that we can support staff in growing into their leadership? So when we think about that, oh, a little bit of craziness going on. When we think about that, here's what we're going to do. We're going to actually go ahead and launch a poll. And for those who are joining us through the replay, you can actually do the same thing in your journal. And then we're going to talk about the strategies for helping people move through these mindsets and into being things like solution focused. And then we're going to rinse and repeat, meaning we're going to go through and continue to talk about each of the different mindsets together. And then we'll come back and we'll wrap up. So when we do the poll, here's what we get to look at and see. Let's pull up this poll here. And so with the poll, we're actually asking you to think about all of the mindsets that you would like strategies for. So there's mindsets around feeling overwhelmed, which some of you have written already. Staying motivated. How do we inspire or get our staff reconnected? Maintaining expectations, right? How do we continue with that positive workplace environment, knowing that we always have a lot of things coming at us? And of course, there's always teamwork and collaboration, or staying empowered, reducing that victimhood, feeling like something is always being done to us. And of course, managing change, right? That's forever in our lives. So, how do we stay flexible and innovative? And as we stop the poll, here's what we find, that actually what happens is, let's let that go, that what we find is that typically people are feeling overwhelmed, and often a lot of times they need help staying motivated or getting staff motivated. So that's what we're going to start with today. And there's a couple of ways that we're going to do this. Initially, we would go on a walkabout. So remember when we would have training and we would have the charts of paper up and around the wall, and there would be a question or a statement, and we would rotate or go around in a circle and write down our thoughts in each of the Padlets or in each of the chart paper. Well, we're going to do the same thing here, and we're going to go into Padlet and write in our experiences, the strategies that we've used in the past to help staff overcome or move through or shift out of these mindsets. You'll notice that there's a chart paper for each one of the mindsets we're talking about, starting with managing overwhelm, right? Dealing with that perfectionism or having a hard time prioritizing. And then we go to staying motivated, right? How do we inspire our staff? Those are always the top two that come up repeatedly. And so that's where we'll get to start and go forward from there. Okay, so as we go through the walkabout, you're going to go ahead and you're going to put in your strategies. And while you do that, I'm going to ask you to remember to put in your name and be very specific. You'll see the X is over the word help. Well, that's not very specific if we want to go back and refer to this. And at the end, we're going to figure out a way for everyone to get the strategies that are already listed on here. So go ahead and click on the link in the chat box. It's going to take you to the Padlet. We'll go ahead and write down our strategies, and then we'll come back and we'll take a look and see what ones come up, as well as talk about some of the ones that I've been coaching programs around. Okay. Thank you for coming back. We've had so many great strategies on there. We'll get to share them with each other, and of course, also at the end. So as we go forward, we know that there tends to be a lot of what we call fixed mindset. And so this is what we're going to be spending the rest of our time talking about, is to help staff shift from that fixed mindset into more of a solution focused or growth mindset. Now, here's what's really interesting about this graphic, and it's one of the reasons that I really like using it. As you read the words inside, right, you see a lot of these very limiting statements. For example, at the top, failure is the limit of my abilities. That means that's typically what we're thinking of when we have this type of mindset. Oh, I'm either good at it or not. I can either do it or I can't. I don't like to be challenged. When I'm frustrated, I give up or I stick to what I know. So again, when we're thinking about this, I want you to look at the direction the face is pointing towards. My question is it pointing backwards or forwards. Yes, you're absolutely right. It's pointing backwards. And here's the thing about a fixed mindset that we don't often think about. And that is usually when we're fixed, we're standing in one place based on our experiences from the past, which means those experiences are behind us. So when we're stuck in this place or we have this fixed mindset, we're focusing on the past. We're literally have our focus behind us. Now, I want you to think about driving in a car, and someone gave me this analogy and I love it. I want you to imagine driving the car as you're, heading to someplace and trying to drive that car while looking in the rear view mirror. Pretty scary, right? We certainly wouldn't get very far. And I would imagine, depending on the traffic around us, there might even be an accident or two, which kind of sums it up for many people who have this mindset. It's very hard to keep moving forward or to even go forward, period, if you're always looking behind you, if you're always stuck in the past based on your experiences. And a lot of times we come up with outcomes that we're not happy about. It's very hard to shift or change things around us because we're looking backwards. So this is where we want to encourage staff to actually move into that growth mindset. Now, again, if you look at the top of the graphic, it says failure is an opportunity to grow. Those of you who've been with me for a while know that I talk a lot about failing forward, meaning that as we make mistakes, that gives us data to help us understand what we need to tweak or change. And so there's an understanding that by using this data, by understanding that by moving forward, we are going to make mistakes. There are going to be failures, and we get to learn from them so that by the time we're done, we've learned quicker, sooner, faster, and we've gotten to a place that we really want to be. So look at some of those statements on there. I can learn to do anything I want. Challenges help me grow. My effort and attitude determine my abilities. Feedback is constructive. I'm inspired by the success of others. I like to try new things. And notice the direction the graphic is facing. Absolutely. Forward. So there's always this thinking about how am I going to move into this next space? And that's where we want to shift staff and help our colleagues and even ourselves when we're stuck into some difficult mindsets moving into it. So, as we go forward, I'm going to talk to us about all of the different mindsets out there. And I'm going to start with the first one of managing overwhelm. And the reason I'm going to start here is because this is the one where we said was number one on our priority list in terms of really helping staff and where a lot of our challenges are. So when we're talking about managing mindsets, here are three different strategies that we can use, in addition to ones that you get to see later on. We have chunking, normalizing, and decoupling. So let's take the first one, chunking. Chunking is about taking those bite-sized pieces. So many of us learn to do this when we are going through school, and there might be maybe a big project or really big paper that we needed to do. And one of the ways that we got through it was to take one piece at a time. Or work on a couple of pages. That's called chunking. When we take just that small piece, we tend not to get so overwhelmed because we don't have to worry about everything else. Our focus gets very narrowed. And here's what research tells us. When we have that very narrow focus and we're able to complete it because again, we're not feeling so like, oh, there's so much to do. We're much more likely to complete it. And when we're likely to complete it, we actually get energized to go in and do that next step or that next piece. It's kind of like checking the box. For those of you, again, like me, who like doing that, I make a list. And one of the best things is either checking it off or scratching it out. It's like, yes, I did that. And chunking gives us that same momentum, that same feeling. So by narrowing our focus and focusing on just a small piece of it, that's a great way to get out of overwhelm. There's also normalizing. So we gave a little sentence here to help people understand that it makes sense to feel a certain way. So again, say for COVID, for instance, it makes sense to feel overwhelmed when we're talking about coming back from COVID because there's so many new regulations, so many new things that we have to figure out with our children in terms of their environment and even our programming, our drop off and our pickup. So when we say to people, it makes sense that you feel dot, 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 whatever the feeling is, by normalizing it, we're actually acknowledging and validating their feelings. And one, they don't feel so alone. They feel like you understand, that you're being empathetic. And then from there, they can actually start to move forward because instead of pushing that feeling down, it's like, okay, all right, I do feel that way. And we can then get to step into the next part of it. Another strategy to think about is decoupling. So this comes about when people get into the thought of all or nothing, right? I've got to do it all or I can't do any of it. A great example of this was a client that I was working with. And as we were starting to talk about, and it was during, again, when COVID was first hitting, and they had moved through virtual classrooms, and the program was starting to think about coming back and doing face to face. And she had a teacher that was very upset. And the reason for that was because she had called to speak to her supervisor, my client, about quitting. And of course, my client was pretty upset because this was a fantastic teacher. She didn't want to lose her. And in having this conversation with the supervisor, it turns out that the teacher had was living with her parents, her elderly parents, and was very afraid about coming back to school. She didn't want to bring the virus back home. And she absolutely loved teaching. And so she was just so upset because she didn't want to quit. But for her, she couldn't think of anything else to do. It was either being in the classroom or not teaching at all. And through some brainstorming and some solution focusing with the client, she went back with the teacher and helped her think about some other ways that she could still be a part of the team. You see, for that program, they were considering not only face to face, but they're also considering hybrid. And for those families who still weren't comfortable coming back, staying virtual. And in having that conversation with her teacher, that teacher was able to stay on board because she realized that she could still teach virtually. So the idea here is to go back and start thinking about other things we can do. It's literally a brainstorming session so that it's, again, it's a getting away from the all or nothing. It's like, okay, so what else can we do? And what else? What does that look like? Okay, and what else? And eventually we start thinking of all of these different things that we can move through. So there's lots of different choices that we can choose from. The last strategy that I put in there is around talking about the keeping things in perspective in terms of it being a current situation as opposed to going on forever and ever and ever, because that starts the spinning. When we don't see a light at the end of the tunnel, we feel like, oh my gosh, I'm just going to be in this place forever. So I love adding the words during this pandemic to sentences. You can use other words during this rollout of the initiative, right? Or during this situation, and whatever that might be. When we add those words during this dot, 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 it gives us the sense that the situation is finite, that we will move through this. And again, when we feel that way, we get to see that light at the end of the tunnel. It allows us to go back and narrow down to our focus, saying, okay, what do we need to get done right now? And that takes us all the way back to that chunking piece. So let's go to the next mindset about staying motivated, right? Again, when you have so much change or when you're feeling like, overwhelmed, after a while, you can get tired and burned out. You're not so motivated anymore. And this makes total sense. So one of the great things about that first strategy is reconnecting to the vision, to the organization's vision, to that person's vision. And again, when we talk about vision, if you've been with me, I spend a lot of time here because the vision is what gives us that gas, right? It's that motivation. And, it kind of, again, in the analogy of the car, if you put the gas in and it's raring to go, that's our vision. The vision pulls us forward because we want to get there. So something to think about is if we're not motivated is how connected are we? Do we need to go back and remember what even our vision is? Or that second strategy, understanding our why, reconnecting to that passion that we have. And if it's not strong enough, then I encourage people to go out and find another vision. If you're not motivated to keep going at it, then your vision is not strong enough. You need a stronger vision, right? So a great example of this was, again, someone that I was talking to, and she was on the verge of retirement and saying that she wasn't very motivated anymore, tired, especially, with COVID and all of the changes. And she knew that it was impacting her team around her. And so I asked her about her vision for her life, because she was getting ready to retire. And she was speaking to me about the fact that she wanted to go and buy land and actually go and do some things on this land. And then I asked her, I said, how does going to work every day support that future vision? And here's what she said, that going to work every day allowed her to pay her bills, pay off her mortgage, put her in a place where she was going to be able financially to be free enough to go and buy this land. And as soon as she started talking about that, you could literally see her whole disposition, her whole manner changing. And she got it. And she was like, yeah, that's why I'm going to work. And as soon as she started talking about that, I knew that when she stepped back into work, she was going to show up in a very different way because work was really helping her with her vision. And because she was showing up in a different way, the impact to her team was going to be different as well. It was going to be more positive. So a lot of times we think that our vision has to be always about the children or always about the family or always about the program. And yes, we definitely want it aligned, but it doesn't have to be our sole focus. It's okay if we're going to work because it helps us pay our bills so that when we retire, we're in this place, because it allows us to step into that work and be fully present, to be happy and joyful about being there because it's getting us to where we want. So again, something to think about. And a great way to connect to that is, again, understanding our why. What is our passion? Why are we here? And reconnecting to that. So, our third mindset is around maintaining expectations. So, this is where that first bullet talks about cameras on. And I shifted the language around that in terms of saying defining engagement. So, when we're talking about maintaining expectations, this is really our focus on that positive workplace environment. This is what we really want to be thinking of. And how do we set up a place where everybody is feeling safe enough to be there, where everybody wants to be there and are contributors? And so, of course, we have to have expectations. But here's the thing, we want to make sure that they're very specifically defined with examples. The cameras on is just one example of that. So, say if we're having a Zoom meeting in our program, is it okay to have the cameras on, or is it okay to have the cameras off? So we know that there's a lot of issues with having cameras on. Sometimes there's low bandwidth if we're working out of our home. And that makes sense to have our camera off so that we can continue to hear and other people can hear us. And when we think about being in our personal homes, many of us, don't have a space where we're feeling comfortable enough for other people to, to see our personal life in that manner, or other people might be sharing the space with us. And so we want to make sure that they have their privacy as well. So some of the things that we can think about are challenges around virtual backgrounds and having a little mini lesson so that people can put them on and have a lot of fun, so that they're still literally and figuratively showing up into these meetings. So I know there's a lot of mixed feelings around that. And yet when we talk about engagement, here is the thing, and I know because I'm guilty of this as well. When we have our cameras off, we are more likely to be multitasking and less likely to be present. So we get to define engagement. And what does that look like? And be very specific about that. We know that this also comes up when even doing face-to-face meetings. How many of us have sat down and talked about norms and expectations for that meeting? And then within one or two meetings later, and sometimes that very first meeting, those norms and expectations have gone out of the window. So it's not, we say that we don't want it to just be everyone participates. We want to talk about, what does participation look like? Let's give some examples. For me, when I talk to groups, I talk about the continuum of engagement and active participation. So for example, at the low end of active participation, we know that you can be actively listening and taking notes. And many of us would consider that active participation. So when we move up further to the continuum and even participate further in that place, and for example, it could be, um, let's see, it could be asking questions, right? Sharing in the discussions, giving your opinions about things. That's even more engagement because you are contributing to the whole of the group. So there's an understanding, right? When we throw that word contribution in there, is that when we're together, are you just receiving or are you giving as well? So actively participating in those discussions, asking questions, now you're contributing. And then on the far right, way up at the top of participation, then it's actually stepping a little further and again into leadership and supporting others. So maybe it's helping others in their understanding of what's going on in the discussion. Or maybe somebody missed a meeting and you made sure that they got the notes, or you helped them get up to speed. So there's lots of levels of participation and active engagement. So we want to talk about that. And again, be very specific and give examples so everyone knows what we're talking about. And of course, there's about being solution focused, right? So that growth mindset versus that fixed mindset. So one of the suggestions on there in terms of the examples under the strategy is having those problem solving protocols. So for example, many of you have come to know me based on the 4-part process of team agreements, where you take a routine or a situation and you take your team through the process of defining the 5 W's, the who, the what, the where, the when, and the how. So everyone understands, what the expectations are, and they agreed to them. So it's full transparency. There's nothing hidden. And then we write those things down. So because it'll be a when there are discrepancies, maybe for some reason somebody didn't follow through, or the situation might have changed, and we need to go back and tweak or change, and a lot of times even add new expectations on there. We have a document in which to refer to so we don't forget or make things up in our mind. So, having something like team agreements or other problem solving protocols in place that everybody's trained on and knows, so that when these situations occur, because again, it's going to be a when, not an if, everyone has a go to process that will move them through it and keep that positive workplace environment. So here's where we go on to the fourth one around teamwork. And teamwork is one that often comes up in terms of leadership and working with staff around their mindsets. So one of the strategies that I put down here is fair but not equal. So fair but not equal is around differentiation, not favoritism. So there's a distinction here, especially as we're working with staff, because when we go in and we're differentiating or we're individualizing our feedback to teaching teams, often because teams tend to talk to each other and other teams, it can come off as seeming like favoritism when actually we're actually going in and meeting the team where they are. So, a great analogy that I do with teaching teams is I'll give them an example of two children in a classroom, and both children have stolen another child's lunch. The first child stole the other child's lunch because they were hungry. There was no food in their house. The second child stole the other child's lunch because there was something in there, Twinkies or Ho-Ho, that they wanted to have for themselves. So my question to the team is, so would you handle both of those the same? And of course their answer is no. So that's when we talk about fair but not equal, meaning we're going to handle both situations. The stealing from either child was not okay. So we definitely want to address it, but we're not going to address them the exact way. So fair but not equal. Helping our staff to understand that when we give suggestions, recommendations, or coaching to one team, it is it is individualized to that team based on their dynamics and their skill sets. So helping staff to understand that you don't run over and say, oh, this is the way you have to do it because this is what we're told. That used to cause a lot of conflict in my programs when I was running them. And it took a while for me to understand what was happening and then share with staff. No, what I'm saying to you is for your team, not necessarily this team over here. I will let everyone know when there's something that's applicable to everyone. So again, fair but not equal. The other strategy that I recently added was the triangulation, because we know that often comes up with teams, either within the team itself or across teams. And often this is the case where something happens to somebody or someone said something to somebody that wasn't particularly appreciated. And before you know it, instead of addressing the person or people that were directly involved, they go to somebody else. And usually, it might be a venting. And then that third party feels encumbered to go and solve it. So when we're talking about triangulation, a great strategy, which we got from Susan MacDonald, is and her book Inspiring Leadership. She talks about when people come to us with a problem or situation, we get to ask them, what do they want? This is a fantastic question. And the reason for that is because often we get stuck in the situation that happened to us, right? So think about that fixed mindset where you're looking backwards, right? We're fixed on that. What happened? We didn't like this and we didn't like that. And so this great question stops them dead in the tracks. And we get to ask them, what is it that you want? What would you have liked to have happened? And now they're pointing forward and moving into solution. And we can follow up with strategies to support them. So, for example, we can offer to help them write down a script, some words for what they're going to say, because we know that it's often uncomfortable to address people around something that impacted us negatively. So we call that having courageous conversations and knowing that it might be awkward and uncomfortable, and we get to have it anyway. So having a script or some ideas about what to say beforehand makes things a little easier. Another strategy to support could be role playing. You can offer to role play that other person and they can practice working, sharing that conversation or using those words that you came up with. Another way we could even support is by providing time for those two or three or more people to come together. So it might be that we step into their classroom or take over in some other way for a few minutes so that they can go in privacy, address whatever the concern is. So there's lots of great ways we get to support here. So then we're starting to come towards the end of things. So we have two left. So we'll start with staying empowered. So when we talk about staying empowered, this is around the idea of circle of control. And when we're talking about the circle of control, that we're talking about what is within our power, right? So we have 100% control over our thoughts. We have 100% control over our body, and we have 100% control over our actions. So these are what we do have control over. What we do not have control over is the past and other people. So helping our staff to understand what is in their control and what is not. And so there's this great equation that I talk about all of the time. And it goes like this. It's E plus R equals O. So E plus R equals O. And what that stands for is the event plus our reactions impact or equals the outcomes. So I'll say that again. The event, which we have no control over because it's past now, we can't change the past, plus the reactions means how we react to that event, we have 100% control over that, actually impacts the outcome, right? A lot of times we think about this as, a situation and the person who sees the glass half open or half filled or the glass half empty. And what's the better outcome? That's all around our thoughts, which then drive our behaviors. So when the event happens, when we consider our reactions, then we do actually have control over the outcomes. And helping people remember that helps them understand that they are not in victims. Things are not being done to them. COVID, again, is a great example of this. So many people, and we understand that there were a lot of horrible things that happened to COVID, that there were a lot of deaths there. So my intent is not to minimize or say those things didn't happen. Absolutely, they did. And we know many people had certain reactions. We know that there are people who felt stuck and stayed in their home and watched TV and were just absolutely miserable. And we know people who said, hey, I'm going to get out. I may not be able to interact with other people, but I'm going to get out. Maybe I'm going to go for walks, or I'm going to get on my bike, or I'm going to do this. And actually, felt empowered because they were out doing things. So our reaction absolutely impacts the outcome. The other strategy on here that we get to talk about is the power of yet. I love the word yet. So when we're talking about things that are in our control, a lot of times, again, you saw that the fixed mindset graphic is, oh, I can't do this. And by putting the word yet on it, it totally changes the perspective. I can't do this yet. It means that there's opportunities for me to grow into it or do it sometimes in the future, because there's always opportunities for us to grow. So putting the word yet into the sentence is fantastic strategy. So here's the last of our mindsets, and this is around managing change. And we know within our profession, change happens all of the time. And it can be a little funny how resistant we can get to it, knowing that it's part of our profession. So when we're thinking about managing change, here's a couple of strategies. The first one is around failing forward. And again, for those of you who've been with me, you've heard me talk about this many, many times. The first thing I talk about is perfection. And I always tell people, I am a recovering perfectionist. And we have many, many, many perfectionists in our profession, right? Always seeking to get things exactly right. And yet we know that perfection is not realistic. It's unattainable. And so we actually set ourselves up to fail or to be frustrated or to be upset. And so understanding that making mistakes is a part of the learning process, it's a part of the growth process. And it takes us closer to those situations. So, for example, again, as we're trying new things, if something doesn't work out, knowing that gives us data, and getting unattached to, oh, I'm a bad person or I'm not competent because I can't do something. It's, I can't do something yet. And this situation has given me really good data on some things that I might want to change or tweak or get rid of or add to. So thinking of it literally as data means that we actually want to fail forward. That's what practice is. And in fact, in the business world right now, they're actually doing a lot to fail forward as much as they possibly can, with the understanding that it's going to get them to solution quicker, sooner, faster. Lots of lessons for us to learn there. So the other strategy on here is bright spots. And I love, love, love bright spots. Bright spots mean we get to look at the things that we're already doing well with, the skill sets that we already have. Because often what happens is that, especially when change comes up, is, oh my goodness, I've got to do this and I don't know how to do it. And yet when we start to think about what we do already know how to do, we can actually apply that forward to the new situation. So when we're talking about bright spots, it's this idea of, if you already know how to do something, even if it's just a little bit, keep doing it and ask yourself the question, how can I do that skill or that thing over here? Or how can I do it for longer? Or how can I do it with this group or that child? The other word we call for that is generalization. And that's the great thing about bright spots. It helps us to capitalize or leverage those things that we're already really good at and know how to do, and use those in situations that are new, which typically come up when we're managing change. So, lots and lots of great strategy for us to think about. So the question for us is, where do we go from here? So here's where I'm going to share with you. We actually have quite a few things that we can do. One is, I want you to think about what you've written down and some of the strategies that we've gone through, and ask yourself the question of yourself of, have I done these similar strategies before? Or some strategies were new that we want to try. Or we can say, what strategies you think will work for you, or what strategies you're already doing, right? Those bright spots that you can continue to do. And again, generalize them, move those strategies forward, right? Who do you want to try those strategies with? When do you want to try them? And we definitely want to ask the question of what might get in our way when we try these strategies, and what resources do we want to have? Do we want to have more training? Do we need more resources around us? Or things like discipline. When I talk about discipline, that goes back to the commitment, the stamina to stay with it, the persistence or the grit to continue to move towards it. So there's so much going on right now and lots of opportunities. So I want to end with us by sharing with you the upcoming Team Agreements Virtual Summit. It's going to be next week, Friday, April 30th. And this is where we'll have a whole day where I'm going to have speakers coming in again from the education field talking about leadership, because the focus is on how do we transform education through leadership development, such as this training you've gone through, managing mindsets, knowing that 80% of the work has to do with our disposition and 20% actually have to do with our skill sets. So it gives us lots to think about. So go ahead to the website. You're going to see the registration coming up shortly in just a few days, and register. And if you're not able to make it, that's okay, because we'll be sending out the replay as well. So I hope to see you there. And this is where I'm going to stop for now.